Welcome to U.S. Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: U.S. warns Israel to uphold laws of war as Gaza faces onslaught. Why George Santos and Bob Menendez are unlikely to resign, yet. Biden calls Hamas attacks the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust as U.S. death toll ticks up. Exclusive former F1 team sponsor poised for £50 million reading takeover. Supreme Court could revive voting map labeled a racial gerrymander. U.S. warns Israel to uphold laws of war as Gaza faces onslaught. Telegraph. The U.S. has warned Israel to uphold the laws of war as its airstrikes continue to devastate neighborhoods in Gaza. President Joe Biden said that while Israel has a right to respond to attacks by Hamas, any retaliatory action must be according to the rule of law. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been dispatched to Israel to discuss the situation. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg echoed the call for a proportionate Israeli response that protected civilian lives. The comments came as Israel's death toll reached 1,200, with over 2,700 injured. The Israeli military has dropped hundreds of tons of bombs on Gaza as part of its response, with an unnamed official stating that Gaza would be reduced to a city of tents by the end of the campaign. The UN has warned that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is deteriorating after its only power plant ran out of fuel. It is estimated that nearly 200,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been left homeless as a result of the Israeli airstrikes. Why George Santos and Bob Menendez are unlikely to resign, yet. Washington Post. U.S. elected officials who are under criminal investigation, such as New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, are unlikely to resign as long as they hold a bargaining chip that can help them negotiate favorable terms if they are convicted. The U.S. Justice Manual explicitly states that prosecutors can negotiate with elected officials over their resignations. The officials are unlikely to be forced to resign, but they can be offered more generous settlement terms if they step down. Biden calls Hamas attacks the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust as U.S. death toll ticks up. The Toronto Star. President Joe Biden condemned the recent attack by Hamas militants on Israel as pure cruelty and the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. The number of U.S. citizens killed in the fighting has risen to at least 22, with 17 more Americans unaccounted for. Signs of U.S. support for Israel have been seen across the administration, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveling to Israel for meetings and the U.S. military moving a second aircraft carrier toward the Mediterranean Sea. The attack has raised questions about Iran's involvement, but the U.S. has not seen evidence of direct Iranian involvement. Exclusive former F1 team sponsor poised for £50 million reading takeover. Telegraph. British businessman William Storey is set to complete a £50 million, $68 million, takeover of English football club Reading. Storey, the former title sponsor of the Haas Formula One team, has pledged to clear the club's debts and invest in the playing staff once a transfer embargo is lifted. The deal, which includes the stadium and training ground, is subject to approval from the Football League. Reading, who were relegated from the Championship last season, are currently third from bottom in League One. Supreme Court could revive voting map labeled a racial gerrymander. The Independent. The U.S. Supreme Court is considering the issue of racial gerrymandering, as states grapple with Republican-drawn congressional boundaries ahead of the 2024 elections. In the case of Alexander v. South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, plaintiffs argue that the state's congressional map discriminates against black voters by moving them out of one district, while reducing the black voting population in all but one district. The court's conservatives seemed skeptical of the lower court's decision, claiming that the evidence supporting it was only circumstantial and that Republicans were motivated by politics rather than race. The seventh charged after Korean woman's body found in trunk, with one suspect saying he was a victim too. The Toronto Star. A seventh person has been arrested on murder charges after the body of a South Korean woman was found in the trunk of a car in Georgia. Mihi Lee, 54, the mother of three others already charged with the murder, was taken into custody on Wednesday. Sihi Cho, 33, had moved to the U.S. in July to join the Soldiers of Christ religious group, to which the suspects referred to themselves. Cho was allegedly held against her will, beaten and denied food in the basement of the Lee family home where she died. Mihi Lee is also charged with false imprisonment, tampering with evidence, concealing the death of another and false statements or writings to the government. Supreme Court seems inclined to reinstate disputed South Carolina map. Washington Post. The Supreme Court appears likely to reinstate a South Carolina congressional map drawn by a GOP majority legislature that a lower court found exiled 30,000 black voters to create a district safer for a white Republican incumbent. The court will decide whether the new map is a permissible gerrymander to bolster the Republican majority or an unconstitutional attempt to sort voters by race. The lower court ruled that the map illegally split black neighborhoods in the Charleston area, and the legislature achieved its political goals by moving Republicans into the district and Democrats out of the district. Kansas becomes the 10th state to require two-person train crews, despite the industry's objections. Associated Press. Kansas has become the 10th U.S. state to require two-person railroad crews, despite opposition from freight rail companies. The firms have sought a reduction in crew sizes to one person, but unions resisted this move, arguing it is safer to have two people working together. The rail industry argues there is not enough evidence to support the claim that two-person crews are safer. Freight rail firms may challenge the legislation in court, as they have done in Ohio and other states. That's all the news for today, folks. Let's recap what we've learned. 1. The U.S. has warned Israel to uphold the laws of war as its airstrikes continue to devastate neighborhoods in Gaza. President Biden emphasized that any retaliatory action must be according to the rule of law. The UN has also warned of the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza. 2. U.S. elected officials under criminal investigation, like Senator Bob Menendez, are unlikely to resign as long as they hold a bargaining chip that can help them negotiate favorable terms if they are convicted. 3. President Biden has condemned the recent attack by Hamas militants on Israel as pure cruelty and the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. The U.S. death toll in the conflict has risen to at least 22. 4. British businessman William Storey is set to complete a £50 million takeover of English football club Reading. Storey has pledged to clear the club's debts and invest in the playing staff. 5. The U.S. Supreme Court is considering the issue of racial gerrymandering as states grapple with Republican-drawn congressional boundaries. The court is reviewing a case that argues South Carolina's congressional map discriminates against black voters. 6. A seventh person has been arrested on murder charges after the body of a South Korean woman was found in the trunk of a car in Georgia. The victim was allegedly held against her will, beaten, and denied food. 7. Kansas has become the 10th U.S. state to require two-person railroad crews, despite opposition from freight rail companies. The rail industry argues that there is not enough evidence to support the claim that two-person crews are safer. Now, let's dive into some analysis. The situation in Gaza is deeply troubling, with Israel's airstrikes causing immense devastation and the humanitarian situation rapidly deteriorating. While Israel has a right to respond to attacks, it is important that the response is proportionate and abides by the laws of war. The international community, including the US and NATO, have called for a careful consideration of civilian lives. In US politics, the issue of elected officials under criminal investigation is a tricky one. While it may seem logical for them to resign, they often hold bargaining power that can benefit them in negotiations if they are convicted. This creates a complex dynamic where resignation becomes a matter of personal choice rather than an immediate consequence. President Biden's condemnation of the Hamas attacks as the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust highlights the seriousness of the situation. The U.S. has shown its support for Israel through various actions, including Secretary of State Blinken's visit and the deployment of military assets. However, the involvement of Iran remains a question, and the U.S. is still assessing the evidence. In sports news, the potential takeover of Reading Football Club by British businessman William Storey is an exciting development. If approved, Storey's investment could bring much-needed stability and resources to the struggling club. The issue of racial gerrymandering continues to be a contentious one. The Supreme Court's consideration of South Carolina's congressional map will have significant implications for future elections. The court's decision will determine whether the map is seen as a permissible gerrymander or an unconstitutional attempt to sort voters by race. Lastly, the requirement of two-person railroad crews in Kansas, despite opposition from freight rail companies, highlights the ongoing debate on worker safety. Unions argue that having two people working together is safer, while the rail industry claims there is insufficient evidence to support this claim. The outcome of potential legal challenges to the legislation in other states will be closely watched. That's all for today's news analysis. Remember, these are complex issues that require thoughtful consideration. Now, it's your turn to join the discussion. What are your thoughts on the situation in Gaza? Do you think elected officials under criminal investigation should resign? Let us know in the comments, and as always, stay curious. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.